Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth Dhamma talk in the 2025 series. So recently, one of the families that supports the monastery here in Australia has had quite a tragedy, and their daughter is suffering from an unusual form of bone cancer. So we've been giving her some encouragement and talks, and recently she's been readmitted to the hospital where the doctors are studying her case quite carefully. So I thought because of this, maybe we would talk a little bit about what to do in the face of difficulties, what kind of advice that the Buddha gives in this sort of situation. Now, this particular family, they've done quite a lot to support the monastery. The father will often drive the monks to and from our meditation teaching sessions. The daughter also usually attends the Sunday school classes that we provide once a month. After the daughter fell sick, then the community all pulled together, and they've been doing all kinds of different meritorious events to try to support them. So they had a chanting ceremony a few weeks ago, and I think maybe 100 people attended, and so they shared merits with the family. So we don't know what kind of ending it will have. It's quite possible that the daughter recovers, but I think it's a good chance for us to reflect that even though we think, like, sometimes people think, I'm a good Buddhist and I'm practicing very well, and because of this, I won't have to face misfortune. But of course, this is a misunderstanding. Then we all have to face different kinds of misfortune. It's simply a part of life. We'll do a sutta. First, we'll discuss one sutta on this topic, but I'll do the Chinese translation to start. So this sutta is from the Anguttara Nikaya. It's from the five, sutta number 49. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. And then King Pasenadi of Kosala approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. Now on that occasion, Queen Malika had just died. Then a man approached King Pasenadi and whispered in his ear, Sire, Queen Malika has just died. When this was said, King Pasenadi was pained and saddened, and he sat there with slumping shoulders, facing downward, glum and speechless. Then the Blessed One, having known the king's condition, said to him, Great king, there are these five situations that are unobtainable by an ascetic or a Brahmin, by a Deva, Mara, or Brahma, or by anyone in the world. So the sutta follows a common structure. Usually, quite often, the Buddha will contrast the situation for an uninstructed worldling versus a noble disciple. Great king, for the uninstructed worldling, what is subject to old age grows old. When this happened, he does not reflect thus. I am not the only one for whom what is subject to old age grows old. For all beings that come and go, that pass away and undergo rebirth, what is subject to old age grows old. If I were to sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating my breast, and become confused when what is subject to old age grows old, I would lose my appetite, and my features would become ugly. I would not be able to do my work. My enemies would be elated, and my friends would become saddened. Thus, when what is subject to old age grows old, he sorrows, languishes, laments, weeps beating his breast, and becomes confused. This is called an uninstructed worldling, pierced by the poisonous dart of sorrow, who only torments himself. So of course, in the suttas, usually we continue in a parallel manner. So the Buddha is giving the first situation and five other analogous situations, which we'll abbreviate here. 2. Again, for the uninstructed worldling, what is subject to illness falls ill. 3. What is subject to death dies. 4. What is subject to destruction is destroyed. 5. What is subject to loss is lost. When this happens, he does not reflect thus. I am not the only one for whom what is subject to loss is lost. For all beings who come and go, who pass away and undergo rebirth, what is subject to loss is lost. If I were to sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating my breast, and become confused when what is subject to loss is lost, I would lose my appetite, and my features would become ugly. I would not be able to do my work. My enemies would be elated, and my friends would become saddened. Thus, when what is subject to loss is lost, he sorrows, languishes, laments, weeps beating his breast, and becomes confused. This is called an uninstructed worldling, pierced by the poisonous dart of sorrow, who only torments himself. So we come to the second part. So if somebody is instructed noble disciple, so especially someone who's attained Nibbana, but we can also apply for somebody who's training that way. So for all meditators are advised to reflect this way. 1. Great King, for the instructed noble disciple, what is subject to old age grows old. When this happens, he reflects thus: I am not the only one for whom what is subject to age grows old. For all beings that come and go, that pass away and undergo rebirth, what is subject to old age grows old. If I were to sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating my breast, and become confused when what is subject to old age grows old, I would lose my appetite, and my features would become ugly. I would not be able to do my work, my enemies would be elated, and my friends would become saddened. Thus, when what is subject to old age grows old, he does not sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating his breast, and become confused. This is called an instructed noble disciple who has drawn out the poisonous dart of sorrow, pierced by which the uninstructed worldling only torments himself. Sorrowless, without darts, the noble disciple realizes Nibbana. Again, for the instructed noble disciple, what is subject to illness falls ill. What is subject to death dies. 4. What is subject to destruction is destroyed. 5. What is subject to loss is lost. When this happens, he reflects thus: I am not the only one for whom what is subject to loss is lost. For all beings that come and go, that pass away and undergo rebirth, what is subject to loss is lost. If I were to sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating my breast, and become confused when what is subject to loss is lost, I would lose my appetite, and my features would become ugly. I would not be able to do my work. My enemies would be elated, and my friends would become saddened. Thus, when what is subject to loss is lost, he does not sorrow, languish, lament, weep beating his breast, and become confused. This is called an instructed noble disciple who has drawn out the poisonous dart of sorrow, pierced by which the uninstructed worldling only torments himself. Sorrowless, without darts, the noble disciple realizes Nibbana. So the sutta concludes with a verse. Of course, we know this is common. The suttas usually will have a verse at the end. Part of the reason is that in ancient times, only a portion of the monks or nuns would memorize entire groups of suttas. Maybe we'll talk about that in another date, but it would be quite common for people to memorize just the verses at the end of the suttas. These, great king, are the 5 situations that are unobtainable by an ascetic or a Brahmin, by a Deva, Mara, or Brahma, or by anyone in the world. It is by not sorrowing and lamenting that even the least good can be gained. Knowing that one is sorrowful and sad, one's enemies are elated. When the wise person does not shake in adversities, knowing how to determine what is good, his enemies are saddened, having seen that his formal facial expression does not change. Whatever one might gain one's good, in whatever way, by chanting, mantras, maxims, gifts, or tradition, there one should exert oneself in just that way. But if one should understand, this good cannot be obtained by me or anyone else, one should accept the situation without sorrowing, thinking that karma is strong. What can I do now? Again, this is Anguttara Nikaya in the 5, Sutta 49, by translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So I know the suttas can seem quite long for those who aren't familiar with them, but we can extract the essence of what the Buddha is advising here, and that is a simple, we can say, reflection on the universality of experience, or simply we can say empathy. We can develop our empathy, try to understand that others are experiencing similar things that we have experienced, reflecting that these things are a natural part of life. So there was one, recently I was reading a story. Someone sent me a book of Dhamma talks by a Thai teacher whom I hadn't heard of before. And he related a story that occurred in his monastery some time ago. So on that occasion, a woman came to the monastery completely overwhelmed, upset, overcome by grief. And she came to that Bhante and she said that her husband had passed away and he had been a great husband and she had loved him very much, but she just couldn't adapt. Now he's not there anymore. And she was so upset. And so that monk gave her some advice and some meditation instructions. And quite quickly, she was able to regain some kind of stability of mind. She was at least able to continue her life and sort of her Dhamma practice. And so she went from the monastery much happier than when she had arrived. But a few days later, she came back and she brought a friend with her. And the friend was also very upset. She was upset because her husband, it's not that he was a good husband, and he had decided to leave her for another woman. And so she was very upset because he had left her. And so you can see either side of the situation. The one person had a wonderful marriage, but she also had to go through like such a painful experience. The other person had this kind of bad experience in her marriage, and she also had to suffer. So both sides can't avoid different kinds of misfortune in life. It's just inseparable. What is somebody who's born will have to undergo some sorts of painful experiences. This is one part of the sutta, but the last verse of the sutta is also very important. The last verse of the poem, the gatha at the end of the sutta. And that is explaining that it's not that we just reflect on these things and accept them and accept our situation. It mentions that if there's some way to attain your goal, then you can try every different means of doing that. It's only when you exhausted them all, you've run out of other options, and you have to accept that this is my karma. At some point you can accept this is my karma and I can't overcome it. However, we shouldn't be too quick to reflect that way. And there's a tendency in some Buddhist circles to adopt more fatalistic attitude. Oh, this is my karma. I can't do anything. So we strive against struggle against our difficulties, and quite often we're able to overcome them. So it's not all karma that we have to suffer the bad results from. Certain kinds of karma can be overcome in various different ways. So for the example of the family I mentioned earlier, the young girl has fallen ill, but the family didn't just say, "Oh, she's fallen ill. This is our bad karma." They do all kinds of things to try to support her. So they found the best hospital available. They found the best doctors available. They tried to make a healthy environment in the home, serving proper food and also trying to make good karma by arranging chanting ceremonies and meditating, keeping precepts. And we don't know what will happen in the end. It's quite possible that, as I said, the young woman will recover. So these things are a common experience for members of all religions and throughout all of history. It's quite natural we can find similar reflections in other places. We can take an example from the Victorian era. Alfred Lord Tennyson has written a poem to commemorate or in memory of a friend who passed away when they were like a university friend. He passed away when they were both quite young. And it's quite a long poem. It reflects on a lot of subjects, such as faith and grief and nature itself. And this poem in Western culture has become quite a popular work. Many people have used it when they were in this sort of situation to overcome their grief. Even Queen Victoria, when her husband passed away, she was reported to enjoy reading this poem. Of course, Victorian England was a Christian culture, and it was also removed from us in time. So it may not resonate with modern readers in the same way as it did with readers at that time. So we've been talking about the sutta we mentioned talked about 5 different situations. So not only death, it can include a material loss or illness or simply aging, various kinds of misfortune. But the case where somebody has passed away is unique. For example, in that if someone merely notices that they have grown old, they're not as vigorous and healthy as they were in the past. Of course, they may be pierced by this painful mental feeling of this realization.
But when somebody has passed away, we have additional responsibilities towards the person who has passed away. So at the start of the sutta, King King Pasenadi hears that Queen Malika has passed away. So usually we have certain kinds of ceremonies we would do in traditional Buddhist countries. To one reason is to make merit for the person who has passed away. Traditionally in Sri Lanka, on 7 days, and I've forgotten exactly, I think 7 days, 1 month, 3 months, and then annually they will do they will do some kind of a dana to make merit to share with the deceased. And the deceased person may be able to share in the merits directly if they've been reborn in a Peta realm, or if they've been reborn in a Deva realm, maybe they will be able to rejoice in those merits and receive a certain amount of happiness. So there's also a certain benefit to the living also. So by holding these sorts of ceremonies, it gives them a chance to gather together. And so they can remember the person who has passed away and support each other in the grief. Whereas at the funeral, maybe it would just be too formal or too tense for that to happen. And of course, there are other ways to generate merit. It's not only by doing dana. We can always make merit by keeping precepts, practicing meditation, chanting, or doing services of other kinds. We can share those with our past relatives, with a particular relative, or with all past relatives in general. So, of course, we have lots of examples. We don't have to look far to find some example of someone who suffered loss. But within the Pali Canon, perhaps the most famous of these stories is the story of Patachara. So I selected out her verses from the Therigatha, some poignant verses to finish today's talk with. One whose path you do not know, not whence they came, nor where they went. Though they came from who knows where, you mourn that being, crying, O my son, but one whose path you do know, whence they came or where they went, that one you do not lament. Such is the nature of living creatures. Unasked he came, he left without leave. He must have come from somewhere, ensnared who knows how many days. He left here by one road, he will go from there by another. Departing with the form of a human, he will go on transmigrating. As he came, so he went. Why cry over that? Oh, for how you have plucked the arrow from me, so hard to see, struck in the heart. You've swept away the grief from my son, in which I once was mired. Today I've plucked the arrow. I'm hungerless, quenched. I go for refuge to that sage, the Buddha, to his teaching, and to the Sangha. Idang me punyang
Idam me punyan
asavakaya
asabakaya
vahang hotu.
bahang hotu.
Idang me punyang
Idam me punyan
nibbānas
nibbanasa
acciyo hotu.
jio hotu.
Mama punya bhagang
Mama panyam mahagan
sambasatanang
namasadanam
bhajimi
ajimi
te sambe
desabe
me samang
desaman
punya bhagang
panyabangan
labhantu.
labantu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.